I just happen to be a technology leader here at Google who has a background in marketing, technology, and behavioral science. For example, if I took all your questions and I put them into Gemini, you could actually read through this podcast and we could create an interaction like this one, which would be completely artificial, but would also provide some value. And are we connecting with these consumers with our advertising, with our brand voice, with our campaigns in general? How can we learn at scale instead of listening to 2% of those calls? How can I listen to 100%? And this is what this technology is allowing us to do. Because you're telling them things that they don't think are actually happening in the stores or in the contact centers. And then they ask, well, this has to be a one-off, right? And then the large language models and other bolted on AI technologies will say, actually, 2% of your calls in 10 million are actually relating to this particular issue. And they're like, we had no idea. And then they ask the question, how come our people aren't telling us these things, right? People who are fed disinformation, which is quite rampant, I would say, in the world these days, are more likely to engage in a conversation with a model or a computer or an application than they will with a human being, because they feel like they're not being judged by the computer. So that's what I see. If we don't get smarter about how we actually, address the work that we have ahead of us, but also eliminate some of the work that is creating the issues, we're not gonna survive as a species. Now, ice hockey is something I still do. My wife will tell you that I should probably do it less, given that I've been injured many, many times over the last 40 years playing. But I'm going to continue until I can't anymore. A lot of folks don't know that I was on national television as a kid, and in a rock band. So.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Just Ravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the branding, marketing, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas. Ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hello, Yves. Welcome to my show.
Good morning. How are you today?
Good evening from India. I'm good.
I don't think people realize the time zone differences sometimes in these things. So thanks for taking the time today. Really appreciate you. I'll send you into your weekend in good spirits.
So, Yves, all the way from Atlanta, from Google, he's been there. Dear audience, you can check out his impressive profile. We won't delve too much into it. Okay, Yves. So why don't you, demystify Gen AI? Is this really such a big deal? Is this really so transformative? Because traditional AI has been there, mostly to the uninitiated, it's ChatGPT and some tools here and there that you discover, oh, now my work is so much simpler. I can do it in such lesser time. The people who are initiated, they understand, but yet it's still a little distant, expert, like not so approachable. Still, people haven't really understood it. So what is it all about? And in that context, if you want to talk about large language models or etc., you can touch upon it, to whatever extent we can understand, we'll try. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and keep things, conversational. And I'll tell you why. In some of these cases, some of the professional nerds out there will definitely want to go into the deep complexities of these new technologies, irrespective of what they are, and as a result, kind of turn people off and don't make them accessible. So let's make it as accessible as possible. And if anybody wants to go deeper, of course, they're welcome to contact me, and I can go as deep as they would like. And ironically, AI is not new, as you know, right? And generative is reasonably new, I would say, within the last 10 years or so. And what makes generative different than traditional AI? So traditional AI typically focuses on analyzing, data that's known, identifying patterns, making predictions, and is not very discriminative of what it's doing. Meaning, you're training a data set with a specific outcome on a very small model, right? So if you think of on the marketing side, predicting who might buy a product or building an audience and predicting propensity to buy, those are things that you can do with traditional AI. Generative AI, also referred to as LLMs or large language models, are really becoming large systems that are really intended to create new data, similar to what that large language model has learned from its data set. But it's not just about finding patterns, it's really about generating things, right? Whether it's new text, new images, new audio, or even 3D models of representations of things. But think of it as creative or generative, right? So a traditional AI model, more predictive, more discriminative. It's not a hot dog, is a great example from an old HBO show. Those are more traditional AI models, and generative ones, think of them as more creative or generative, generating new things, new ideas, and really being a companion for creators and creatives on how to address their target audience better, how to talk about their brands in a better way, and really reaching consumers with language that they are using, right? So marketing really at the highest of levels, I'm not sure if anybody would describe it this way publicly and stuff, but marketing is how you talk to customers and how you talk about yourself in order to make that connection. So that's where a lot of these generative AI models and the technologies embedded in software products targeted to marketers and sellers in different parts of the industry can really kind of bring this magic to life, where we can abstract like the deep innards of the technology and really kind of surface the cases that are most helpful in the creative areas. Now, it's not to say that generative models can't do predictions. Like one of my colleagues here calls them a really fancy autocomplete, and that's true in a way. But we're also starting to learn how these models can be used for task automation, workflows, which are incredibly important in marketing. And although it's not really doing proper math necessarily and inferring what the answer could be, it's also getting better at being a calculator that is more deterministic, or at least narrowing the answers down to something which is true. So what it is today is not necessarily what it's going to be tomorrow, but that's how I would define both of those. Now, how we apply those to consumer packaged goods companies and retailers who I work with every day in my capacity here at Google Cloud is, if you think of conversational data or consumers affairs call recordings, for example, in stores or directly to the CPG companies, what could you learn from this data if you were able to converse with it and ask it questions using a large language model to extract some of the insights, but also generate some of the language that could be used when speaking about your products or addressing your consumers. And this is what we talked about in the podcast where I think you found me with Melina Palmer, the Brainy Business, where we are really kind of looking very hard at the intersection points between behavioral science and AI in general, and how we can make sure that behavioral science OGs, as I would call them in marketing, understand how to use these behavioral models in order to actually predict behavior, but also speak the language of a consumer in order to reach them, connect with them more directly. That was a long answer.
Yeah.
with a few secrets, but we'll get into it a bit deeper, I'm sure.
Yes. So first of all, you gave us a very nice phrase, fancy autocomplete. That should send everybody's brain thinking that, okay, that's a very, very practical way to establish relevance. And from there, the fact that it can generate, so it can understand and generate, and that is where the marketing, role becomes very clear, because you are going deeper. Gen AI is going very deeper for deeper insights, making all these connections and analyzing data that was not analyzable, which is very unstructured, from social media, etc. We'll get into it. I'm just trying to handhold also my audience, and also help you create right messages, as Yves has been saying. The language of the consumer will be picked up and utilized in creating those marketing messages, also text and words, etc. We'll get into marketing applications and quickly various ways it can be impacting marketing and business, how it is right now. Like you've said, it's going to go even further, Gen AI, and very quickly. Would you like to get into what is Google's role currently? How is Google handholding various sectors for adoption of these technologies?
I think you'll get different answers from different people at Google, and there's official answers, I would say, that I'm not qualified to give officially. I can tell you what I see as representing Yves Boudreau, who works at Google, which sometimes are aligned and sometimes are maybe where we should be going in terms of how we talk about this. But I'll give you some examples. Officially, Google is a leader in data search and AI as it comes to giving people answers, right? Our mission has been the same since the company was founded 25 years ago, of connecting people with the world's information and making it, universally accessible and useful. So this is really in line with us as an organization, but we're a leader, right? Not only in the actual productization of these technologies, but also open source communities, tools, and frankly, just the experimentation platforms that we make available, both for free and for commercial uses. I would also say that the role that we play is one of a very conservative, thoughtful organization, which looks at safety and privacy in a way that I feel is exemplary in the world. Having worked with other companies who have not been the best stewards of privacy and information, and frankly, letting people know of the pluses and the minuses of using technology. Some of the free platforms that we make available are usually in our labs organization. So we have something called AI Studio where people can experiment with images and text and video as inputs and kind of understand, what happens, if you will, when you start interacting with these technologies. Maybe more for an engineer from that standpoint, but all the way to the free Gemini app that you can download for iPhone or for Android or even use on your computer. And some new products that we're releasing this year, which are also available for testing at the moment, called Notebook LM, where we could actually take a bunch of documents like you sent to me, and I can create my own podcast, which is based on those documents, but also artificially generated with the voices that really create something interesting. Right, going back to what do generative models do differently than AI models? Generating new information, and frankly, just creating an opportunity for people to ask questions of data, right? To see and learn and understand from a different perspective some of the questions. So for example, if I took all your questions and I put them into Gemini, you could actually read through this podcast and we could create an interaction like this one, which would be completely artificial, but would also provide some value to listeners and people just looking to learn, and also see things from a different perspective, which is incredibly important, I feel. We also offer all these products commercially as well. So if people want to use it on their own data and stay privacy safe and secure, a lot of the underlying technologies that I just mentioned in those products is available for our Google Cloud customers, both for marketing, sales, but also for healthcare, financial services, and several other industries where we focus and add value with our overall technology portfolio.
Okay, great. And if time permits, we will get into it again towards the end. But we have a lot to cover, Yves, as you've already pointed out.
Yeah, secret number one, by the way, when I saw just Ravi's list of kind of what you wanted to touch on, I said we could be here for the whole day. So who knows? Maybe we'll make this like the extended version today.
Yeah. So make the most of it, right? I mean, that's the mantra today, isn't it? More is good. Okay. So Gen AI and marketing, we're going to look at some applications. Some is already out there. I'd be talking to some market research experts also, even in qualitative, research. Even it's being used in India. MRSI papers are happening about how to adapt it further to our current practices, etc. So I'll just mention the application and whatever you want to share about that, whether you have an example in mind or you want to explain it further. So we'll just go quickly on that. So Yves, brands staying culturally relevant. Gen AI, what role can it play for this?
Yeah, one of my favorite TV shows on the History Channel is the food that built America, or the companies that built America. And there's long histories of a lot of these consumer packaged goods companies, for example, who are literally hundreds of years old in some cases, and the brand relevance that they maintain. I think last night was General Mills and Kellogg's as examples, right? And they're back and forth over time in terms of their brand recognition and things that they would try. What ends up happening these days is we're seeing failed attempts, right, to reach consumers, right? Spending a lot of money on very long traditional ways of activating media and paid media and search campaigns they're kind of failing a little bit or a lot, right? And I won't bring out too many examples because I think sometimes we need to just put those things in the past, but I think there's some really popular, I would say, examples of that have been numerous and not hard to find. But in terms of some standout examples, I mean, I mentioned earlier about starting with conversational data. You asked about keeping brands relevant. I think we've lost the ability as brand marketers and as companies to really hear what customers are saying. I'm not saying listening, right? I'm not saying about like, well, we've looked at the product reviews and we've looked at what our BPO, our business process outsourcer, who's actually answering the phone calls on behalf of consumer affairs. We've listened to some of those calls. Everything is okay. Like we're doing well. Like we're addressing the issues. We're issuing coupons. We're taking in product concerns. And then I ask, okay, are you doing that at scale? The answer is typically no. We listen to 2% of our calls, 5% of our calls. Or I'll ask, how are you using the language that your consumers are using in order to then talk back to them? And the answer is, well, how are we supposed to do that? And I think the answer really is with generative AI and with large language models. And I'm not saying Google models alone. I'm saying just try with any model, right? So, for example, I'll be speaking at a conference in April. And one of the demonstrations that I want to give in order to kind of get people thinking about brand voice is about figuring out a way to get closer to the consumer voice in brand voice messages and brand associations. So, for example, I am a SodaStream customer, which is a company owned by PepsiCo now. I make my own soda, my own sparkling water at home. And there's reasons why I do that. And there's reasons why I say I do it. And there's other reasons that I don't necessarily understand why I do it. But the reason why I say I do it is because I don't want to have to go to the grocery store and I'm trying to save the planet. And the reasons why I don't know why I'm doing it, I can't tell you because I don't know. However, you can definitely infer from language that people use, right? There's a fantastic book called Mind State for Marketing by Will Leach, which actually helps you classify with language very specific states that a customer or a consumer is speaking to you and how you could use that information to then talk back to them in a safe way. Some people, in the behavioral science community call it regulatory fit. I believe Will's book makes it much more accessible for people. So if you're trying to learn how to speak to your customers and what your brand voice should sound like, it should be able to relate to how your customers are relating to you in the language that they use. So there's a very, very large opportunity for retailers, CPGs, banks, whoever it is, who has the ability to structure that conversational data. When I say conversational data, I'm talking about call recordings, chats, reviews, both digital and voice, where they can look at the language that consumers are using, okay, and have them understand, are we connecting with these consumers with our advertising, with our brand voice, with our campaigns in general, both in organic and paid media as examples. How can we learn at scale, instead of listening to 2% of those calls, how can I listen to 100%? And this is what this technology is allowing us to do. Here's the irony of it all. When we actually present some of this information to customers, so we have some technology in our conversational AI portfolio, in our customer engagement suite, as we call it, that puts this information in front of executives. And they're very long, difficult conversations. They're almost like therapy in a way, because you're telling them things that they don't think are actually happening in the stores or in the contact centers. And then they ask, well, this has to be a one-off, right? And then the large language models and other bolted on AI technologies will say, actually 2% of your calls in 10 million are actually relating to this particular issue. And they're like, we had no idea. And then they ask the question, how come we not, like, how come our people aren't telling us these things, right? And so there's a whole, I would say, litany of behavioral reasons why people don't report these particular issues. But now we can use technology in order to kind of give you the truth of what's happening, so that you can actually action on it, right? And when you're actioning on these particular issues, and I'll give you some examples here in a minute, you can then replay the conversation to a consumer in a marketing campaign, in a sales campaign, or frankly, just in how consumer affairs or customer service representatives are speaking to customers in a way that can diffuse situations, in a way that can make them feel like they're being heard, in a way that they feel like their feedback is being taken and that will be, incorporated appropriately into product, procedure, or what have you, whatever they're calling about as an example, right? I can tell you, having listened personally to a lot of these calls coming into CPG companies, the product feedback coming into consumer affairs lines is incredibly high. Like, it's really, really incredibly high. And I didn't believe it, right? I had to actually do some of my own call recordings and call some of these consumer affairs teams. And, I had a bag of dog food that had like, was it peel moths in it or something like that? And I said, if I call these people, they're not going to issue me a coupon. And they did. And they were very thoughtful about how they handled the interaction. But I can guarantee that conversation is not going to be used for anything else, when in reality it can be used for a lot. It can be used to identify supply chain issues, right? How many of these bags, right, have this problem? Are we seeing a supplier problem coming in here? Can I use that information to then predict or correlate an event, right, and connect these reported issues from consumers to a company? In another case, I've heard people crying on the telephone, right? Really bearing their soul in what they feel is a private conversation that should be important to an organization. If somebody is taking the time to call you, right? And I'm separating voice from digital for a very specific reason, and I'll explain why later if we can get to it. But you have an opportunity in the moment to listen and hear what a customer is saying, and then use technology to help you then readdress those concerns at scale in a very impactful and powerful way using generative technologies. So that's my challenge to the community at large here, is to start becoming much more familiar with how to scale your hearing abilities for your customers and consumers via your contact centers, in order to then use that information to really reach and connect your brands and your products with those said consumers and the lookalikes that are out there, who are likely to be consumers of your brands and products going forward.
So that's so powerful, Yves. You've described it so beautifully, that the intensity of emotion that one consumer has shared with you, to be able to understand it and the source of it, what is causing it in your process, in your product, in your delivery, scale it up. Because qualitative data, that is the one that lets you understand the depth of it, but how to fit in the quantitative aspect of it and then source it to your product and the marketing mix. I mean, that's the power, that's the brilliance of it. And like you said, the conversational data, because it is letting the marketer profile the consumer more holistically. There is this chat data, there is this professional profile data. So all the aspects, how are they coming together, and who is this person, and hence what is this person's context right now when it is interacting with your category or with your service. So there's just so much understanding, which actually makes you be afraid of it as well. We will get to the risks, and because with great power comes great responsibility, so we'll get to that in a small way. If you've covered the segmentation aspect of it, you've also covered the insights, how deeper meaningful insights can be elicited. Also, like you said, behavioral science can help you make sense of it. What is really going on, what is the why is this behavior like this here? I mean, is this the planning fallacy, or is it the optimism bias, or is it the loss aversion? And I mean, these terms everybody's heard, but why we can understand.
Yeah, I think in terms of going back to what I said at the very beginning, if you're starting a diet, if you're starting an exercise program, if you have a particular goal that seems unachievable and you sign up for, you mentioned planning fallacy earlier, there are ways that you can create an environment that will get you to said goal, right? And I feel like I give this example to a lot of people, right? I'm going to run a marathon today, but I can't get out of bed. And, we have to focus on what's right in front of us, but then show people in a very, bite-sized way of very simple next steps that they can take so they can feel some level of achievement, right? There's an endowment effect out there, which is incredibly powerful. And ironically, what I think is missing these days when we talk about any of these programs is the adoption, right? So I've given these tools to my people and they don't use them. I'll give you some contact center examples here as well. We had another customer that was talking about how their contact center agents or even their marketing agents, were not copying and pasting generative summaries of phone calls. So one of the actual workflows in contact centers or consumer affairs centers is to summarize a phone call by having somebody type it out. And our technology works incredibly well. We've had some customers in the 80 to 90% range of accuracy of that call summarization. And when you looked at the desktop application that they were using, it forced the user to click buttons or to copy the text and paste it into another window. Or that the screen was incredibly small. They had like a 27-inch screen. And so we walked out of the meeting, and my recommendation to the customer was not to buy any of our technology. It was to go out and spend $150 on a 40-inch screen and give it to every one of their customer service people. Now, I have no idea if the customer did that or not, right? But if we can fix and segment issues in terms of the choice architecture that people are given, the adoption of the technology can be significantly improved just by changing the environment, right? One more quick example, and this is a challenge, an easy to get out of bed moment for all the people who want to get started with Gen AI, irrespective of who you are. Take your favorite, Gen AI tool, if you will, right? Mine just happens to be Gemini because I work at Google, but you can use Claude, or you can be adventurous and use some of the new stuff that's in the news these days, but pin it to your browser. So in certain cases, have that window open, even on a separate screen, all the time. And I can guarantee you that you're more likely, if the page is open and it's visible to you, that you will try and use it more often. So instead of asking a human a question, just ask the model a question, right? There's also some fantastic research that's coming out around misinformation that a professor in Canada has been doing and releasing in the public these days, that we're also seeing that people who are fed disinformation, which is quite rampant, I would say, in the world these days, are more likely to engage in a conversation with a model or a computer or an application than they will with a human being, because they feel like they're not being judged by the computer, right? So there is hope that this technology, right, even used in simple applications like pinning it on your desktop or having it on your phone in an app where you can create the architecture by which adoption of these technologies, whether you're a contact center, consumer, market, or what have you, you can create your own environment that will actually encourage you to do it. Now, ironically, you may have some people saying, "Oh, Eve, that won't work." There's a certain level of reactance, right? I'm assuring you that there will be an increase in your knowledge and utilization of these technologies if you change the architecture by with. So another one, a secret that people don't necessarily know: I don't eat as much ice cream as when I was a kid. And the simple reason why I don't eat as much ice cream is because I don't bring it into my house. If it's in the house, you eat it. If you decide to choice architecture it out, you won't eat it. So my challenge to the team and all the listeners here is to go pin your favorite generative agent onto your desktop, and when you see it, you will be more apt to use it if it's open and ready to go.
Yeah.
I just like Gemini a lot, so please go use Gemini.
Yes. Go Gemini. Go for Gemini. You've said that, if I'm paraphrasing right, that what triggers adoption of that behavior, once that understanding is there and to the most granular form, then you can create those kind of environments for your consumer to help them, make it easy for them to adopt. And that technology is doing otherwise also, isn't it, Eve? With all those smart watches. I mean, just look at what is happening in the case of healthcare. Like I was working on a condition nutrition, for diabetes. And the whole attitude to it has completely transformed. It is not a disease anymore. It's a metabolic disorder, because you have all these gadgets that you can track, that you can record, that you can again send the feedback and change the behavior. So that is again another power of Gen AI, that the behavior can be changed so easily, and hence an entire category can get disrupted. The relevance and need for entire category can go. Like you talked about ice cream being in the house. I mean, just the fact that our delivery and supply system is such in our country, I'm sure this is everywhere. In 10 minutes you can get this, in 15 minutes you can get this. The grocery lists have gone. You just don't need that list. I mean, unless your delivery platform only is saving it in the cart, etc. So In this is again another scary part of Gen AI. It's so powerful. You sometimes feel like you're just a puppet. I mean, they can make you take up behaviors that might not be good for you in the long run, as a human species, also. So now, if we look at, for businesses, and you touched upon creativity, so creative innovation, because that is again another scary part, that so far it was like Gen AI cannot, I mean, AI cannot create. It can predict, it can analyze, it can make sense of things, but now it can create. Oh my God, that was the only thing that we human beings could do, and it could not. And now, this whole tussle of, will it support me? Will it replace me? So we will get to that, and I really want to hear what you've got to say, about it. But before that, small businesses, let's just continue down the power of Gen AI part. Small
Mhm.
businesses, low cost, high impact. What are the possibilities there for them growing their businesses? Because a lot of our audience are also entrepreneurs. What do you want to say here? Because I mean, if you have any example where the business person comes home very happy today because he's saving a lot and making a lot more, would you want to share anything?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I understand that the small business pieces are definitely tough, right? Because the idea is that these large companies have unlimited budgets, or they've been doing this for so long, and it's difficult to break in. Um, Ironically, what I've worked for a lot of different startups where it wasn't unlimited budgets either, and you will attract these small businesses, attract an entrepreneurial spirit that I don't think the large companies have as much. Kind of just percentage, let's say, of penetration. So, for example, if I'm a 10-person company, chances are I've got 10 people who are willing to really do anything and try anything in order to make it happen. And there are a lot of people at those organizations, like large, Fortune 1000 companies, that still have that, but they're diluted with the machinery of large organizations. So it's not that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I can say that one thing that I would strongly encourage small businesses to do is to experiment. Right? You have the ability, without all of the corporate baggage of policies, procedures, public companies, government regulation, that are not necessarily stopping you from experimenting. Right? You mentioned motivation earlier. There's libraries full of human motivation books as examples. But what's happened in the last several years is that there has been a lot of smaller boutique consultancies who work with small businesses, sometimes for free, in order to run experiments that help them, and frankly help the communities at large do a better job. So, for example, there's a local company here, for example, that is a shipping organization, and I use them because they're local. And I try and make sure that, to support local business when I can. I don't know if I'm the norm or if I'm not the norm, but I remember being in this store, shipping store, and the phone was ringing, and I said, just out of curiosity, like, if you don't answer that, because I was actually explaining to the person, you probably should, like, please go answer the phone. I don't want you to, like, take the time out. I don't need your focus right now. Go answer the phone. I said, just out of curiosity, where does that go? And she said it goes to a voicemail box. I said, okay, and like, how often do you check that voicemail box? And then she just smiled at me and she said, sometimes at the end of the day when I'm lucky, right? And so I would challenge that person to find a means to take those recordings, okay, and understand what people are calling about. But to your point about, like, motivations of people, in some cases, like, when I went back to the store, I said, well, what was that person calling about? And they were looking for a notary, okay, and this store offers notary services. I can guarantee you that if you call that person at the end of the day, that they've gone to some other place to get this notarized. So how can you use technology or experiment with a callback service as an example? And there's tons of companies that will do this. Right now, it may not be affordable to the smaller companies, but I think you can find a large list of startups specifically in the generative space where it's not expensive. I ran into one yesterday, and I have no affiliation with this company, but it's a subscription service called Magi. So Magi, MAGAI.co is the name. And it's a very small platform, uses a bunch of models, including Google models, with a nice interface for marketers. I think it's like $19 a month or something like that. So if a small business is saying $19 a month is too much to spend on understanding customers, the longevity of that business is highly in question for me. But the experimentation piece, there's a lot of free Google tools where if you took some of these call recordings and put them in there, you'll actually get an idea at scale. And a lot of it's free. Like, it's not even going to cost you a ton of money, but the motivation needs to be there to want to really connect and understand customers at a deeper level, which I think a lot of smaller businesses do want to do. And then it's a matter of getting them out of bed in the morning, right? Or creating the habit in order to do this on a regular basis if they're really serious. But I've been studying behavioral science formally and informally in university for about 7 or 8 years now. And there's three things I've learned in behavioral science, and that is worth repeating to people. Right, what people say and what they do is incredibly different. So believe what people say, but also verify what they do, because you're going to see often a disconnect between those things, right? And then kind of bolting to that, if you really want to infer what somebody's going to do, right, take the easiest thing that they can do. So for small entrepreneurs, they're going to say, I'm going to do that. So they're going to say, I'm going to go do what Yves said. I'm going to take some of these call recordings and I'm going to go pick my favorite tool and I'm going to go and analyze these things like you said. And then the chances of them doing it are very, very low. So, which leads me to my second thing that I've learned, which is incredibly powerful, is if that same person who says they're not going to do it took my advice earlier of just pinning Gemini or Claude or whatever other one you want to use today, or Magi, onto your desktop, you're now creating the choice architecture that's going to encourage the behavior that you're trying to actually get to. And then the third thing that I've learned about behavioral science, and I don't think this is true of your listeners, is that nobody wants to hear me talk about behavioral science. So, but a very, very powerful kind of way to really kind of commit to this experimentation that I talked to earlier. And there's some fantastic free tools out there, right? If you want to go and look at the 3Bs model from Irrational Labs, or if you want to read a book on COM-B, on motivation, there's a lot of different ways, but find a simple to absorb experimentation model, and then understand the power of the say-do gap, the status quo, and choice architecture as three like fundamental concepts to encouraging behavioral change, not only for others, but for yourself. And you can have a real fighting chance at having your small business be very, very successful. But experimentation and designing the experiment is key for small businesses and large ones. It's just that the small businesses have a much better shot at making it happen because there's less people to convince that this is a good idea.
Yeah, brilliant. So experimentation, be agile. That is your strength. Utilize it. Now it becomes even easier with technology, and make it easy, or you have the opportunity to make understanding the consumer a default, with all these tools. So you can put automatic processes, even if you don't have the time or the resources, or even the skills. Sometimes, people get intimidated. How are we going to analyze it? But there are free tools now. Go and do it. Make it easy for your own people to always be in tune with the consumer. And these are brilliant, advices for small businesses. So what about my creative counterparts in advertising agencies? Because a lot of them are using Gemini, ChatGPT, everything. So for creative storytelling, what is your advice? Do you want to share any secrets here?
Yeah. I guess I should have called out all the secrets earlier, because I think I've already shared a few, but I didn't call them out as secrets. So that's my bad for not priming anybody on what the secrets were. But look, let's go back to what I just said earlier about the status quo being like one of the biggest challenges that people are going to have, right? What's the easiest thing to do? And that's likely what is going to happen. So for example, with agencies, what is the benefit to them changing how they do business today, right? It's easier just to keep doing it the way it's been doing it. And frankly, it's been working quite well until you hit a roof, or there's a compelling event, right? A ceiling of budget that you can spend, right? Or there's a disruption in technology, which is exactly what generative AI is at this stage, right? It is the internet of our generation. It is the electricity of the 1920s. Whether people believe that or not, I mean, I'm pretty sure most people are convinced, and if they're not, then I'd be more concerned about them. In this particular case, for small businesses, let's focus on small businesses, who, by the way, don't use agencies anyway, right? Understanding what your customer is saying to you and translating that into messages that you can use, you can do on your own today. So when it comes to creative storyboards or advertising that you want to do on Facebook or on Google search or on any other channels for social, which is where small businesses usually live these days. We're not doing national Super Bowl campaigns if you're, Jim's Hoagie Shop here in Atlanta, but you can basically come up with your own campaigns and your own brand voice very specifically. So using it for creative purposes without having to engage a consultant, which can be extremely expensive, or outsourcing that piece of the brand, is incredibly powerful. If you're a larger organization, I think that we've got some customers now that have told us who have not used some of our technology to go directly to, the end, let's say, product of the actual advertising campaign to production. They've cut down their storyboarding process, right, or their overall, let's say, campaign process from like 12 to like 4 weeks by removing a big chunk of the upfront creative piece. So when I'm going to an agency, I can give them a campaign brief, a product brief, a PDP, right, a product description with imagery that is not what they're going to use as the final, but is much more illustrative of what they're looking at. Because when you look at this creative process for advertising, go watch a few episodes of Mad Men. They're sitting in a room talking about how they're going to reach these people. A missing ingredient for me, and what I'll keep pushing for the next several years, is looking at conversational data in order to understand the language, but also then using generative technologies to mold that language into language and imagery that can be used for very early storyboarding, which could take several weeks to months, and shrinking that down where we can hand over a package to an agency to go, create the final approved, trademarked, beautifully visible with an MMM plan to go to different channels with the paid media version of that, but really shrinking down the creative process, right? And I'm not saying to replace the creators. I'm saying to give them the tools, right, go and make this process faster. So they can hand over something, right, collaboratively with creative directors in order to get them to get to market much, much quicker. Because in some cases, they have to be turning these things around in days, right, or weeks, and not months and years. So I think the traditional way of doing it is alive and well and should continue. There's a lot of legacy brand power and brand voice that is incredibly powerful. This is why we still have products from the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s as relevant today as they were back then. But if we can shrink the amount of time and give people tools, and there's a whole adoption strategy to it as well, that is a whole separate conversation, getting people comfortable with it, but having them understand we're not trying to replace what you're doing. We're trying to augment your skills. But I can tell you right now, the small businesses will do this, and they are doing this. And so whether people want to or not, it's going to happen in the larger companies. So try and get ahead of that curve and create a fighting chance for you to understand how to use these technologies and what they mean for your day-to-day roles. But it's not a matter of if you're going to use generative AI, it's which parts are you going to use and how quickly can you adopt them to see the value in these different technologies.
There's every reason why you should adopt it, because you get to your target, you identify your target, you talk in their language, you do it so much faster, you can get right feedback, you can iterate so much faster. Mm-hmm. How much of your resources you're saving, and if at from one lens, marketing is about giving value to your customer, then you're giving them what they really want because you've understood it, so much better. Yep. So for innovation also, I think, there'd be an implication if you want to get to that. But if we just talk about adoption right now, because, we've just come around it, how can organizations help, people adopt and be less biased against such technologies? And are there any tools that you'd recommend or any courses that you'd recommend?
I think the one that jumps out as top of mind for me as free and affordable is really the 3Bs approach that Irrational Labs uses. They produce some materials that are free, and they have a boot camp which is incredibly affordable. I think it's a few $100s with a community of people that can help answer questions, but it's really a curriculum that they have. And it focuses on identifying the behaviors that you want to change. It then forces you to be very uncomfortably specific about those behaviors and the barriers. So the second B being the barriers. And and then trying to understand what the benefits are to this change and how you would communicate those benefits. So if I had to pick one that I have done myself and that I do recommend strongly to others, and I've done a lot of these different things, it's a very practical approach that you can do for free, or for very, very small amount of investment. That also puts you into a community of people that are trying to do the same things, but being very, very focused on what you're trying to solve, which a lot of people don't spend. I know people use this Einstein quote quite liberally over the years, but right, spending 95% of my time identifying the problem and 5% solving it is a very, very difficult thing to do. Maybe we can link the 3Bs kind of like PDF here into the show notes for folks to look at. And if you can get out of bed and read that, then the next step there really would be to sign up for the boot camp and see how far you get. And just try and stick with it. I think that your audience probably, if they're here today, have already invested a lot of time in listening this far, and are probably more likely to get out of bed and put those running shoes on and maybe run or walk that first mile on Mondays and Tuesdays like they should be.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. So, Yves, can you do some crystal ball gazing for us and tell us what is the future? Because like you said, this is just the start.
If I'm looking at crystal balling, I think the pace and expectations of companies and consumers will continue to accelerate. So you should expect that you will be spending more time working. If you do not find a way to automate and work smarter using technology, it's going to be a rough go for those individuals and those companies who don't adopt these technologies. Having said that, I can't stress enough that sometimes the easy thing is to react to a problem. In fact, more often than not, it's easy to react to a problem. It's easy to fight a fire when it's happening. It's not as easy to prevent that fire. So if you can't figure out a way to work more efficiently and stop the phone calls from coming into the contact center in the first place, as an example, those are the people in the companies that will burn out and fade away very, very quickly. They won't be the multi-generational companies that we have today. So that's what I see. If we don't get smarter about how we actually, address the work that we have ahead of us, but also eliminate some of the work that is creating the issues, we're not gonna survive as a species. We're not gonna have more leisure time, but we will be crushed. We will be crushed by just more mindless work and not addressing the real root problems that we need to solve.
Are you prepared for a rapid fire?
I am not, but let's do it.
That's okay. Mother's best advice.
Put yourself in somebody else's shoes first.
Alternate profession could have been
an AR executive at a record company.
Nice. Okay. As per your wife, your most often used phrase.
You have to think about it differently.
Very good one. Okay, I'm not sure if this is the one, but okay, fine. I can't shoot you at least. One thing no one knows about you.
I think I'm pretty transparent, so I don't know that there's a lot of things that people don't know, but a lot of folks don't know that I was on national television as a kid, and in a rock band. So most people don't know that.
A book you'd like to gift to all your friends.
Oh, do I have to just pick one?
Yes. Okay, two.
Okay, well, we'll do two. I would love for them to read Magic Words by Jonah Berger. Very specifically because we talked a lot about conversational AI today, and another one that might make them feel a lot better about them day to day is Everybody Lies by Seth Stephens-Davidovitz.
Yeah. Don't look at other people's Facebook posts with your Google searches. I love that quote. What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
I would tell my 18-year-old self the same thing that I told my son recently. He's 18, and he asked me for advice, like, give me some fatherly advice. And I was kind of taken aback, and I said, let me go and be thoughtful and think about this before I just tell you, like, don't end up in jail or something like that. And I think that my mom may have told me this, but there's always going to be an easy decision in life and one that is not as easy. Chances are the difficult choice is probably the right one.
That's so true and so deep. But I will shoot you. That was a trap. You fell for it. But I love the response. Thank you for sharing. What is your greatest joy?
My greatest joy is my family. Is really my family. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say it, by the way, on the podcast before, and it's one of those say-do disconnects. I do not spend enough time with them, but I can't imagine being away from them or not being with them.
Wow, how nice. If you were to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
I would put all my efforts in applying technology and behavioral science to solving metabolic disease.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Oh, and
Yeah,
you
I
talked
forgot to mention this
about
earlier, but I actually do wear a CGM sensor from Dexcom, and I'm not diabetic, but I do believe that it is technology that can really be helpful for people who are pre-diabetic, diabetic. My mom is diabetic as well, and so big fan of trying to prevent metabolic disease.
you said your work is your hobby, but I'm sure there's something that you really enjoy. We want to know a little bit more about.
Yeah, I do have hobbies, and I just don't do them enough. I'm originally from Canada, so I still play ice hockey, which I understand field hockey is very huge in India, and I didn't realize that. But ice hockey is something I still do. My wife will tell you that I should probably do it less, given that I've been injured many times over the last 40 years playing. But I'm going to continue until I can't anymore. But I also was a radio and nightclub disc jockey for years. So I recently took my brother's challenge and I restarted bringing that talent to bear.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Okay. What's a lesson that took you a long time to learn?
Sometimes not saying anything is probably the best thing.
Hmm. How would you like strangers to remember you?
As somebody who cared deeply about helping them reflect on the importance of being thoughtful.
What's your jagged edge?
I'm a person who listens to people and raises concerns as part of a team, and people often associate that with some negativity or complaining. And what I assure people is, I'm going to raise issues, I'm going to identify a path forward, and I'm willing to actually sign up. And if that's considered complaining, I'll be a complainer until the day I die.
Super. So, Yves, this is a wrap up now. I will request you to share something about yourself.
I'm an curious kid from a very small mining town in Northern Ontario whose mom was a teacher and dad was a custodian. And I deeply care about helping people solve problems, learn, and self-reflect on the importance of being thoughtful. I just happen to be a technology leader here at Google, working in the consumer and packaged goods industry today, who has a background in marketing, technology, and behavioral science.
Yay. Okay. How can people reach out to you? What would you prefer them emailing or LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is the best way to find me and reach me, but you can also just you can email me at Google as well, which is just email eve@google.com. If you are looking for a thoughtful approach to day-to-day learning about brand marketing, intersections with behavioral science and technology, Jagged with Just Ravi is the place to be.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful being able to chat with you and learn from you.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me.